In 1983, award-winning physicist Gary Holz was diagnosed with chronic progressive multiple sclerosis. By 1988, he was a quadriplegic. Then, in 1994, his doctors told him he had 2 years to live. Desperate and depressed, he followed a synchronistic suggestion and went to Australia to live with a remote Aboriginal tribe. Arriving in a wheelchair, alone, with almost no feeling left from the neck down, Holz embarked on a remarkable healing transformation of body, mind, and spirit, and discovered his own gift for healing others. Joining us this hour is his wife, Robbie Holz, as Gary since passed away. And together they co-authored a beautiful book at the request of the Aboriginal healers themselves. It's entitled Aboriginal Secrets of Awakening, a journey of healing and spirituality with a remote Australian tribe, a Bear & Company 2015 release. Our guest this hour is Robbie, who is herself a holistic health consultant dedicated, quote, to continuing the healing work of her late husband. She healed herself of hepatitis C and has also worked with Aboriginal healers in Australia. She lives near Seattle and maintains her own practice there. Thank you so much, Robbie.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I read all of the book you authored with Robbie, Secrets of Aboriginal Healing's Physicist's Journey with a Remote Australian Tribe, and made it through the longer story of your own after having met Gary. But I'd like to, if you don't mind, start with a real focus on the book you two co-authored, Secrets of Aboriginal Healing's A Physicist's Journey with a Remote Australian Tribe.
Sure.
So when you first met your husband, he had already had this remarkable experience. Why don't you share with our audience a little bit, as you do in the book, about how he actually ended up in Australia and the state of affairs that he was in?
Yeah, and it was quite the state of affairs, wasn't it? Well, in 94, Gary was a physicist, and he was also a quadriplegic, and he he had very little feeling and movement from the neck down. And he actually had about 6 months left to live, and the doctors, Western medicine, had given him, they'd given him the talk about putting his affairs in order. And that evening, he happened to meet a woman who was a naturopathic doctor from Australia who said that the remote Australian tribes people had remarkable healing abilities, and she thought that they would be able to help him. So you got to remember, Gary is a physicist, very much immersed in the black and white scientific world. It doesn't exist if you can't prove it. But he was so desperate for answers that he contacted them. One of them had a phone number because he had an apartment in the city because of his children living there. And the tribesman, Ray, said, "What took you so long? We've been waiting for 4 months," even though Gary just learned of them the night before. So they're so tuned in. They're so tapped into this higher consciousness. They already were preparing for him and had brought in a woman who was part Aboriginal, part English, so she could communicate to him.
That's Rose.
So he went into the Outback, and 10 days later, remarkably, had feeling in his body again, which he hadn't had in 7 years, clumsily walked on that airplane ride on the way back, and more than anything was really transformed in mind and spirit.
The book is really a very simple, short book, and it is so powerfully packaged with a tradition. When you think of these people whose traditions go back 60,000 some years continuously, Ray and Rose, those are the two Aboriginals who helped him,
right? As
well as, and I think it's a really important part to talk about, the entire village. I mean, and that's a different approach to healing is a community reality, not an individual plague.
Exactly. They did, and most people don't pick up on that, but they did play a role in that. And to be honest, healing from the other side of the veil, from Aboriginal tribes people who had passed over, were also assisting very dramatically.
Yeah. And as you both write in the book, the healing of our subconscious programming that starts in infancy and childhood is often what's behind our illnesses as we age. So let's start there, this very basic notion that he was told, and people talk about it a lot, but it's not always understood. It's not a blame game. It's how to understand our illness as a reflection of ourselves.
Exactly. And I think this is why the remote Aboriginal tribes people were willing to generously give us their healing secrets, because they said we really didn't understand how healing worked, and we were really missing a huge piece. And that is that the body, mind, and soul are all needing equally involved in the healing process. And where most people get tripped up, their body and their soul is aligned with healing, but their emotions are not aligned with healing. And we have to pay attention to what kind of emotions are we creating, because it's affecting the body. And I think Dr. Emoto, with his water experiments, showed us beautifully how anger creates a different cell and has a different effect on the body, and joy and gratitude have a healing effect and create a beautiful, higher, vibrant state. So people needed to become aware that if you have resentment that you're actually holding these things in your cells, and if you create enough of it and you don't release it, it can create a physical problem.
In the book, one of the things that Rose, the healer, did with Gary was a technique used in kinesiology, which is a sort of muscle testing pattern where a person holds out their arm on one side of the body and the practitioner pushes down to see if there's, whether resistance, whether it's strong, whether it's weak, and the person in the other hand might hold a food or something they may be allergic to. But in this case, the kinesiology was used to test statements of the conscious and subconscious. So give us an example, as you do in the book, of how Rose began this work. It's really lovely. The whole thing is absolutely stunning.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's a very simple book, but it's very interesting, and it does give this healing information. So we wanted to get this information out to people, and I think that this book does it beautifully. And one of the first of the 5 steps that the Aboriginal people gave us was, you have to be willing. Are you willing to heal? Because some people, there's a secondary gain in not being well. They don't have to be as responsible for a job, or there's any number of reasons. And so this Rose, she tested Gary, muscle testing. Are you willing to heal? And Gary was surprised to hear that subconsciously he was not willing. That was news to him, but it was a very important piece to why he was blocking, because your body wants to heal. It innately wants to do that, and it knows how to do that, but he was holding it. And so he needed to understand how he had created this. He had numbed himself from a really emotionally challenging childhood. It was a very abusive childhood with his alcoholic, beating father. And so he had not only learned how to numb himself emotionally, he had actually numbed himself physically, and he needed to become aware of that, which is the second step to that Aboriginal healing, is becoming aware of the emotional core. The Aborigines tell you that if you don't get to the emotional root, it's like picking the top of a dandelion. It'll come right back again. And I think we all know people who've had tumors removed that come back again because they have not removed the emotional core that started it.
And, of course, one of the great challenges for anybody in the listening audience is most of the Western medical model doesn't believe in any of this. They treat our body like a war ground, and they go to war against it. And people have body intelligence. Our body, we know our bodies. I go through this a lot with people. We each know our own bodies better than anybody who will ever look at it, ever. No matter how expert, how precise their wisdom or knowledge, well, maybe if they're clairvoyant or telepathic, or, they can work in other dimensions, there's an added addition to the talent. But still, having said that, your soul, and as Robbie is telling us, is true, that we know what our body needs, but we have a culture that sort of drums out of us this ability to listen to our own body.
The body will not lie. The mind will, but the body will not lie. And that's why you have to listen to what's going on, because this dis-ease will literally turn into, as we know it, a physical challenge, a real disease. So it's these emotions. For instance, grief. We tend to hold grief in our bodies, in our chest area, in our heart area. And if you continue to hold that grief and you're not releasing it and you're continuing to have more and more grief, you are creating a potential problem in that heart area where you're blocking life force, you're slowing down the chakras, whatever you want to call it, you need to be able to be releasing that. And if you have propensity for heart disease or breast cancer, you especially need to become aware how the emotions are affecting your body. And I don't think Western medicine truly appreciates at this point in time that the emotions play a huge role in our physical wellness.
Oh, absolutely. Somebody once said it's the weather, and if you have a sunny disposition, you're going to have some sunny days. That doesn't mean we don't get illness as a part of our journey. And many people believe that our illnesses are not just our own, but they can be ancestral. They can be tags left from other lifetimes. When the Aboriginals work with Gary, you talked about these 5 stages to basically reprogramming ourselves. So before we go back through willingness, awareness, acceptance, empowerment, and focus, and I'd really like to take those apart again because that's a great gift that this book provides to anybody. And it really does allow, because I read your books, and it really does enable anybody to self-help towards restored health. And that doesn't mean you don't go to healers and practitioners, but there's some really great tools here. So let's start with, which we've talked about in meditation and other quantum physics, the theory of connectedness, because the Aboriginal people stress this.
They do. They do talk about connectedness. And I think that the more I understand what the Aboriginal way of life is, and I'm no expert, I just have very limited information from my experiences, the more I realize they are living a much more advanced lifestyle than we are. I would call it fifth-dimensional living. They're very connected to each other. They know that we're all connected. They know that we're all just different forms of the one. And to be honest, they've never lost their connection to nature because they've always stayed telepathic. And they'll tell you that we used to all be telepathic, and then we started speaking out loud, which they think is very chaotic and very primitive. And once we started speaking out loud, we lost our connection to hear the trees singing to us, to hear the mountains talking to each other. And the Aboriginals, I think, if I can go so far as to say, I believe that that they are Atlanteans who have become safeguarded in this vast desert, totally unconnected from quote-unquote civilized society. They've maintained these old ways, and they've never lost that connection. And they will spend more than half of their time unplugged from the mind and plugged into this higher consciousness or greater consciousness, and that makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm. And it's so very heart-centered. I'm writing a book on the traditions that honor white spirit animals, and this is all about telepathy.
Yeah.
And even how we ourselves can dream information or wisdom settings that we need for our own benefit or for the world's benefit or for a neighbor's benefit, that dreaming at night does not need to be unconscious. We can very deliberately ask for help. And in the same way, I loved that you started out our discussion that the Aborigines, when Gary first showed up, they said, we've been waiting 4 months. And often with many people I've interviewed of native traditions, you'll hear stories like that. Somebody will arrive after a long trip and they'll go, well, what took you so long to get here? 8 years, mate. I've been waiting.
Exactly. They are so tuned in, and that's the key. Is I think that we tend to be very, and they feel like we're very chaotic, and they feel for us because they'll tell you that we really don't use our subconscious mind to any degree. You can call it quantum physics, but this is what they've been doing for over 60,000 years. They will actively go in and create their reality. They start at about 3 or 4 years old. It may look like meditating, but they're accessing the Dreamtime for much of the day. And that's a much richer life. And because of it, I believe they're in these higher frequencies, these higher states. They're, like you said, love-based, very service-oriented, tremendous gratitude, just beautiful culture to be around, the remote ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Our guest, Joseph Emmett, who's written on Buddhist mindfulness, talks about, starting with gratitude. And pretty much everybody I've ever interviewed from any tradition uses that word especially. And that when I remember Greg Braden and a Kabbalist I once interviewed who said, you don't pray from lack. you thank Creator for having already delivered what it is you've needed.
Absolutely, yes.
So the programming that the Aborigines say each of us do to ourselves, or we allow to happen around us, is what we need to become aware of. So we're going to take a little break, and we're going to come back, and maybe you can share with us some of the methods used for doing that. And then if you don't mind, Robbie, I'd love to really walk through these 5 stages for reprogramming ourselves, because there isn't any one of us, at least nobody I've met, and certainly not myself, who can say, oh yeah, I'm all totally well and wonderful and, bliss city right here in my body. So we're going to work on that when we come back together. There are 2 books that I read in preparation for her work tonight. Secrets of Aboriginal Healing, a physicist's journey with a remote Australian tribe, which she co-authored with her deceased husband, Gary. Deceased is a strange word. Let us say ever-present all around, which is really more accurate, particularly in his case. And this moment, I feel him around. And their other book, Robbie has written with Christian Howard, Aboriginal Secrets of Awakening, and you can learn more about both of them as well as the therapeutics that Robbie offers herself in her practice, Holz, Holz, wellness.com. So one of the things the Aboriginals are quick to point out is that our body doesn't know the difference, or our subconscious doesn't know the difference, is a better way to put it, between something envisioned and something real. So when we're imagining things, whether they're positive or negative, they're actually shaping our internal reality. So let's start with that.
That's a great place to start. And to be honest, the Olympic athletes, they know this. They use it. And they have shown through experiments that when for instance, the Olympic swimmer envisions that swimming and winning, the muscles actually fire, whether it's happening or not. And so it's so important to envision the end result. See yourself there. Don't get hung up on the process of how you're going to get there, because the mind will get very overwhelmed. But see that end result. And I know that when Gary came back from the Outback, he was already a physicist, and he got his degree in immunology and became a doctor of immunology, practicing what the Aboriginal people had taught him. And it's called psychoneuroimmunology, how the mind affects the immune system. And what Gary did, which kind of surprised me initially, but not really knowing the bigger picture, people would come to him with stage 4 cancers and AIDS and all kinds of things that Western medicine didn't have any answers for. And Gary was able to help most of them because he would see the end result. He would see them already well. And that's part of what I do as a healer. I see them already at the end result of where they want to be. So that's an important, easy step that people can take, is to focus on that end result, what they want.
And for somebody who says, well, that sounds like a lot of wishful thinking, let's talk a bit about what wishful thinking is.
Well, exactly, because I don't think people realize how powerful they are as creators, that every thought is creating something. And what the Aboriginal people taught us is that a lot of times we're focused on what we don't want. We're focused on lack, we're focused on illness, we're focused on pain, and what we focus on is what we tend to create. So it's important to pay attention to what kind of thoughts are you regularly marinating in, and what kind of thoughts are you regularly thinking. And the more emotion that you have, the more, of course, that propels it. So it's not just wishful thinking. It's about, as you start to, it's kind of like if you know you're going to go on a trip, you start getting excited. You start going and buying the clothes that you need, or you research online. You start moving in that direction. And this is the same approach. You start getting excited. You may not know how, but you start getting excited that you're getting well, and that you're getting better, and that your cells are you're creating vibrant cells and releasing the old stuff. And so you start doing that, and you start moving in that direction emotionally, and then your body and the universe support that and follow that as well.
Very true. And I know from my own life experience that healing has so much to do with, as we're about to talk about, first the willingness, this desire to be well, the belief that one can do it. And we'll talk about all those stages, but it's very interesting. I shared with the audience one night a recent experience of my own with some things I'm dealing with, hyperthyroid, and somebody wanted me to go through a battery of tests when I wasn't at my best. And my body I'm like a child when it comes to when people want to do something to my body that my body doesn't want done, it cries. It's very interesting, just as though I'm 4 years old. And so I've really learned that when somebody says, oh, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and I don't have faith that it may not be the right time, it might be the right suggestion, I will cry. And then I know immediately, no, that's not what we're doing now.
Exactly. You know, I don't think people appreciate how their emotions so affect the body. It's a huge part of our wellness. And I remember taking depositions of oncologists, and they would always say the same thing, that when people had cancer, there was something, people had sustained some kind of a stressor for at least 3 months prior to that cancer, within the last 6 months to a year. And it was that connection between the emotions and the body that we cannot discard. We have to pay attention to that. And that's why when you recognize that negativity, fear, and stress create a different cell, it's going to have a different effect on the body. But love-based emotions like gratitude has a beautiful healing response. And again, Dr. Emoto showed us how those type of cells look very symmetrical. They have a higher frequency, a higher vibration. And when you're in these love-based emotions, joy, patience, kindness, gratitude, it creates a higher frequency, and disease can't sustain in that high frequency. But these other ones, fear-based, negativity, stress, which so many of us live in, especially here in the States, we're used to that. It's a different cell. It's a low vibration. It's very sticky and gunky, doesn't hold much life force, and it creates this perfect swampy breeding ground for disease. So you have to become aware of what kind of emotions am I regularly engaging in, because it's affecting the body and creating a different cell, a different kind of state.
Mm-hmm. And as you all were taught, this operating manual, I think as Rose put it, this programming starts before birth, then at conception, then in the womb. We carry layers of history, our own, our ancestors, our souls. And by the age of 7, we're pretty well set emotionally and behaviorally. So how much, because Gary, as you pointed out, it was about locking down emotions as a way to have dealt with an abusive alcoholic father and not being able to feel powerful enough to handle it in a way that would have been restorative to him and his brothers, etc. And so it took his lifetime, as he pointed out, I'm right where I need to be, once he could accept and thank MS, multiple sclerosis, as a gift for his healing. I always joke, I go, yeah, illness is how our body heals itself.
Yeah. I think that, and Gary was the first one to say, it took him a while to get to this point, but he realized that the MS was a huge gift. That wheelchair was a huge gift because it changed him and helped him become a better man. Helped him get on that path that was much more fulfilling. And this is why what we want to start doing to heal, and this is why I get so passionate, Dr. Zoh, is that most people are not supposed to be getting so sick. It's just that our emotions are just crumbling our bodies. Our bodies can't handle the weight of these emotions. It's not necessary to go through a lot of this. So we want to start paying attention to controlling that mind rather than that mind controlling us with its conditioning, and paying attention to whose voice really is behind that emotion. Is it the collective? Is it my mother's voice? Is it a scared inner child? And shifting that mind into a more love-based response when you can. And gratitude you can always find something to be grateful for. Mm-hmm. That's a great way to shift that fearful mind into something that's a much better, vibrant state for the body.
One of the things you all were taught, and it's so interesting to give just a moment's appreciation for how ancient these understandings are. It's like Buddhism studies the human, whereas religions study God or whatever theory. And in the same way that these practices are known from observation of the human, another, way of studying human in relationship to all that is. they say there's 3 types of people: victims, rescuers, and the master of oneself, being neither victim or rescuer. Share with us a little bit more about these themes.
Sure. And I do really appreciate that the remote Aboriginals are the oldest continuous culture on the planet, and this is wisdom that has been passed down word of mouth for generations. They're so ahead of us in that regard. So they have so much to teach us, not just in healing, but in general.
In being.
In being, absolutely. They're there where they are, where we want to be. They're in the 5th dimensional existence, the remote ones. So, but you know what they taught us is that we have to pay attention to: are you playing the victim? Are you playing the rescuer? Because if you're a master, you're playing neither of those. And I think that when you recognize that we're all here on this beautiful planet of free will choice as etheric spirits currently embodied in a physical form, everything here is an opportunity to help you grow on your path. And it's very deliberate what's on your path. It's very deliberately placed there. And you're, number 1, able to overcome it and heal through it. And number 2, you have all the help on the other side of the veil you could possibly ask for. But it comes back to everyone's learning in their own way at their own pace. So I love that phrase about allow other people their lessons, their journeys, and don't fix them. There's nothing wrong with them. They're not broken. That's just the way they're learning in this particular lifetime on this particular path. So when you recognize everybody signed up for what they signed up for, everybody agreed to play the different parts, including the wildlife, it makes it a little easier to accept this is what we all agreed to, and that sometimes it's not easy to swallow, but it teaches us much. It's here to help us all grow. And this planet offers tremendous diversity, tremendous opportunities to make huge leaps forward. What we can do in one lifetime on this planet is tremendous. And so don't try to take that away from other people by trying to fix them or thinking that they're broken. They're fine. They're learning exactly the way they need to. And maybe what you need to try to work on is a little bit more acceptance. Maybe that's why that's on your path.
Mm-hmm. And of course, compassion. All of us are working on greater compassion for ourselves, for each other, for the animals, for the trees, for really what's happening to this breathing, living being we are in. We're not on, made of the same things she is made of, Gaia. So let's go back then now to these 5 different stages of reprogramming ourselves, because we talked earlier about the muscle testing when, Gary would have to be asked, do I believe I can heal? And it would be a no, or do I, am I doing my best? Or what was it? I'm trying, he would say, and he was told, don't say I'm trying, say I'm doing my best. That the very words we select are extremely important.
Yes. Absolutely. Even something as simple as I'm sorry versus I apologize. There's power in our words, and we need to pay attention to be more conscious of the words we're using, which are simply conveying the emotions and the mindsets that we have behind these thoughts. So the first step is willingness. Are you willing to do what it takes to get better? Are you willing to make changes? Are you willing to make the changes that are necessary to get you back to health? And some people might be surprised to find out that there's secondary gain, and they're not totally willing. The second step is awareness. You need to become aware of what started this. For instance, it's very interesting that, and I have healed fibromyalgia. It's on the rise. It used to be a lot of women that had it.
Yeah.
Now it's becoming teenagers. Autoimmune diseases like fibromyalgia, typically what's going on is it's tremendous stress throughout the entire body. And that's what we need to become aware is go back far enough in this emotional to find out what's the emotions that started it. And that means that they tend to be living in a lot of fear, a lot of stress, and it's throughout the whole system. And that's usually behind autoimmune diseases. And now teenagers are feeling that pressure and that stress. So that's why you want to go back and figure out what are the mindsets that are creating that. What's the belief systems that are creating this dis-ease in the body. If you're not comfortable emotionally, chances are it's affecting the body. So that's where you need to start paying attention to where do I typically hang out. So have that awareness. What might have started this? With Gary, he needed to become aware that it was this anger towards his father who used to beat him when he was young that had started this numbing emotionally until he numbed physically. And so he needed to learn how to forgive and recognize that his dad, there were things to be grateful for about his father. He had taught him how to be a strong man. So it's about that shifting again out of that negativity and fear from the mind into the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And so that becomes, that sort of takes us into the third step, which is acceptance. You may not like it, but it's here for a reason. It's here to help you grow. It's here to help you on this path to find more love, to find more compassion. So it's here for a reason. That's the third step. So again, you don't have to like it, but you have to accept that it's here. It's here to help you on some levels. That's why Gary, when he finally realized that the MS, the wheelchair, those became huge shifts for him. He became more grateful and realized that without that, he would never have gotten to the point that he did and evolved like he did. So do you want me to keep going about the last two steps? Okay.
Please.
The fourth step is empowerment. Take your power back. And I love how you brought this up earlier in the hour. When I was given a blood transfusion years ago when I delivered my son, it was tainted with hepatitis C. And the hepatitis C almost killed me back in 85. And the experimental treatments that the Western medicine put me on almost killed me again. So I almost died twice. And at this point, I was in such a state, I couldn't get out of bed for, I think, 6 to 9 months. I had such severe brain damage, I couldn't remember, does the tag in your pants go in the front or the back? How do you get water out of a tap? I mean, it was very severe. And Western medicine had nothing for me, and they told me there's nothing that you can do. If I had believed that, I would not have survived.
Mm-hmm.
But my son was too little to remember me, and that was the impetus to find answers beyond Western medicine. And since then, I cured what they said was incurable, the hepatitis C, the fibromyalgia, the brain damage, the chronic fatigue syndrome. So take your power back. Western medicine only knows what it knows. It's wonderful for so many things. And that's what I love about these Aboriginal healing principles, is it will complement whatever you're doing, but it will also help you heal faster and sustain the healing. So take your power back. Become responsible for your health, your healing. And that's very important. And stay focused on that end result that we talked about. And like I said, most people are supposed to heal.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are supposed to heal. It's the emotions that are holding them back. It's the emotions that are blocking that body from able to do what it's supposed to do to heal. It knows how to heal. It wants to heal. So that's an important part.
Well, and those pronouncements that people get in the Western model is so devastating and so inappropriate to the entire concept that Hippocrates and Asclepius and anybody else who ever understood what healing is that really healing, as you point out, is a journey of growth. And I myself have gone on a number of them also for things that I was told, oh, you'll never walk comfortably again. Oh, you're going to be a handicapped woman. And I didn't believe it. And so I took the brace off. I was 19 and went and dropped out of school, went and started yoga, saw a chiropractor. This was back in 1973. And a year later, I was dancing. But if I had really believed the image and the prognosis and the therapeutics that they were giving me, I would have been in a wheelchair, I wouldn't have walked, and I certainly never would have danced again. So there's so many millions of us who are such proof of this, Robbie, and I just want to thank you for doing the work you do with people who come to you with such trust, and you're able to give them these beautiful tools of willingness, awareness, acceptance, empowerment, and focus. We'll be right back.
Hello, this is Russell Four Eagles, medicine man and author of The Making of a Healer. You can learn more about us at www.soaringeagleswellness.com, and you are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zoh Hieronimus, a truly light being.
Robbie Holz is with us. Go to www.holzwellness.com. Her book, Aboriginal Secrets of Awakening, a journey of healing and spirituality with a remote Australian tribe, a Bear & Company 2015 release. So, Robbie, I want to come back to many of the things that you've written about and things that you teach, because you and Gary also have worked together with animals.
Yes. He started out healing animals, right.
And his method of healing, healers can be very different, but he, and the way you talk about it, is when he would heal either an animal or a human, not only did he envision the outcome having already occurred and being grateful for it, and he discovered he had a guide whom he called Julie, and she helped him tremendously. We all have guides.
Yes, we all do. Every single person, whether you believe it or not, you have a guide that's with you 24/7.
And for those that perhaps maybe don't know it, don't believe it, or want to find out who it is, what's a way to go about finding that out?
Well, I've had so much validation over the years that I have no doubt that they walk by my side, and it's really fun watching how they get my attention. And honestly, I have a number of articles up on my holtzwellness.com website that talk specifically about how guides and angels communicate with you, how to communicate with them, and how they can help us, because there is so much they can do to help you, but you have to ask. It's a free will planet. There's nothing wrong with pain and struggle. But I've gotten to the point where I ask for help with anything and everything because it allows them to grow. They're being in service. But it helps me tremendously. I wouldn't be where I am without their help. Mm-hmm. So Gary and I do the same thing. I help people. I do consultations with people and help them understand. I communicate with the guides on the other side and find out what are the emotional cores for this particular person. But then we also get assistance from them. We get assistance to help them release it. We get assistance to help them heal. So when Gary was working on people or animals, he was the conduit for the energy. The energy, for instance, the first we talk about in the Awakening book, the first thing I brought to him was a little dog who had a broken spine, and the vet wanted to put it down because it had a broken spine. There was nothing they can do. And Gary put his hand on that spine and sent energy. He was the conduit, and Julie, as you said, his guardian angel, was sending energy through him. And Gary would stay very focused and really stay focused on that dog getting well. And after about 4 visits with him, that dog's spine did heal, and he was able to run around, and they would visit us often to show us how well this little dog was doing. So it's everybody's different in their healing approach, but I think that for Gary and I, the best thing for us was to just get out of the way, get our minds out of the way, and allow the beautiful assistance on the other side of the veil to work through us.
Mm-hmm. I liked what you said about, our angels, our guides, our teachers on the other side are also in a growth pattern, being of service. And as I joke, the question is not to be or not to be, or to be or not to be. It's to be of service or not to be of service.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, that's so true. And they love being of service. We're doing a 3rd book on how to work with your guides and angels because it became very clear people don't really know how much they can do. It's tremendous. And again, it's up on the website. Read it. We put up a lot of information to help people as much as we can. And so one of the books we were reading was called Angels in My Hair. I love that title. It's a woman who's been able to see angels since she was 2. She's in Ireland. And she said she sees millions of unemployed angels waiting to be asked to help. So that really shifted me into ask more, become the conduit, because they cannot step in unless it's life-threatening or irreversible damage. It's not supposed to happen. You can become the conduit and ask for help with that person that, again, not the victim or the rescuer, but whatever is in their best interest, that they be assisted in whatever way.
And I like the way you said that, whatever's in their best interest. The Spindrift Institute did studies on prayer and discovered after so many experiments on mung beans or fruit fly larvae or whatever, is that thy will be done prayers were much more effective than things like, may Aunt Martha's arm be healed if she broke her arm. It was, may divine right order be restored for Aunt Martha, and the healing that's supposed to happen happens.
Yes. Exactly. Things are restored into the right order again, and the body is often trying to do that. It's the emotions that keep blocking it and getting in the way and creating cells that don't support vibrant bodies. Yeah.
And the other thing, that our culture is so bad at, and it used to kind of recognize the importance of, which is rest. When we're
Yeah.
sick, I'm always blown away by people will tell me, oh, yeah, I had this, some major diagnostic like a colonoscopy. That's not a nothing. And I went and played golf that afternoon. I'm thinking, your body has just gone through this trauma. You've given it no rest, or something serious, a serious illness,
Right.
and somebody has a surgery, and then it's an outpatient, and they go home that day and they expect to be back at work the next day. Meanwhile, they've been put to sleep, they've had stitches, the body's been invaded, there's an energetic shift, and there's no rest.
Right. It comes down to what's the compassionate, loving choice here. And if you really listen to that body, it's doing the best it can for you. Be loving and supportive and give it the rest that it needs. It'll tell you what it needs.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes down to what would love do, and love would go rest after something like that.
Well, and I think, Gary's a great story, picture perfect for what happens to individuals. And because I founded a holistic healing center back in 1985, like yourself, I've had the opportunity to see so many amazing healings that occur because people really want to heal and they're willing to go outside the box and learn about themselves. But nobody would go with him. There he is, a quadriplegic with a catheter for his, traveling by himself. He can't stand. He can't do anything on his own. He could barely lift his hand. And yet off he went because he met a woman in a bar who he felt had something to offer, and he listened to what she said, and he had trust in what he heard inside himself. And that's what I wanted us to sort of focus on for a moment, because our culture doesn't enable necessarily an appreciation that each person in our listening audience and each one of us who are talking at the moment really does have body wisdom and really does have soul wisdom. And when we deny it to ourselves and just do what others tell us, we miss the opportunity.
Exactly. That's so beautifully put. That body does know how to heal. It does know how to change. I've never felt comfortable with fighting the cancer. You don't fight the cancer. The cancer is simply a messenger, letting you know where there's a problem. So you love that body back to health. You give it good food. You give it exercise that feels right. You give it, not just fresh, healthy, organic food and water, but you also give your mind healthy thoughts that are vibrant and that are healing. There's a difference there. We have to pay attention to what am I feeding my mind as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And of course the soul, are we paying any attention whatsoever to our purpose? And we each have one.
Exactly, and that's why the soul is equally involved in the healing process, and most souls are aligned with healing. Now, quite often, and we talk about this in the Awakening book, you get people you get babies, or you get very young children with disease or challenges. That soul typically is not aligned with healing because they came in that way to experience life that way and what that journey would present to them. But for most people, the body and the soul are aligned with healing. It's the emotions that are off. Now, I don't believe that Gary's soul was totally aligned with him healing 100%. I think he needed to go through his journey exactly the way he did and then leave. And he did live 12 years beyond what the doctors told him he would. But then I think his journey was to do exactly what he needed to do. I don't believe his soul was aligned with him 100% healing. But most people, that's not the case.
Well, and also, as you point out, you and Gary are still very connected, even though you have another very loving personal relationship, and Gary still works with you. And I find, I've done so many interviews on afterlife communication and between life choices and what's happening with us in our little classrooms when we leave our bodies and what are we busy doing, making worlds and other things outside the body. But it's a beautiful testimony on all levels.
Yes, he's still very involved in my life. He's part of my healing team on the other side. And I did not expect that he would continue to show up every morning after he passed. He would show up and he still does. I still catch him sending tremendous energy my way, especially when I ask for some help with something. He's there in a second, continuing to help more on the other side of the veil than he could on this side. So we're still in a partnership. It's just shifted to him being on the other side of the veil.
Mm-hmm. And many sacred societies actually teach that as souls we're far more powerful when we're out of our bodies after our life than when we're in our bodies, in our physical experiences. And so in closing, we have about a minute and a half or so. What haven't we touched on that you'd like to be sure to share?
Oh, I think, I love that you talked earlier about beautiful Gaia and how we are here to help and assist her. And the Aboriginal people have never lost that connection, and that is so important to them, is their ancestors, because they know that's a part of us, and Mother Earth. That's huge to them. They are kind of the original environmentalist, if you will. So if you can, try to make life-affirming, compassionate choices. That means paying attention to, are the eggs that you're buying on sale, or are they the ones that are coming from, they're treating the planet in a beautiful, sustainable way, and those chickens are being happy and healthily raised. The same thing with anything that you buy. Is it a life-affirming, compassionate choice?
Mm-hmm. That's a nice way to put it. Stephen Schwartz, who wrote The 8 Laws of Change, among other books, also uses that as sort of the premise of how do we choose. And I wanted to tell you that years ago, knowing your connection to Mary, she told me to start the New Order of the World Mother. And at the time, I had no idea what that meant. And I do believe I now understand it, that people like yourself and others who bring their hands and hearts together in love for all are the New Order of the World Mother. So thank you for being part of her work. 21st Century Radio is produced by Hieronimus and Company. Our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner. Our engineer is Noah Dankner. I'm Dr. Zoh Hieronimus, and we hope you enjoyed the show.